You might have seen some headlines recently, pretty surprising stuff, actually.
Definitely caught my eye. Big news.
Yeah, about the formal dismantling of the U.S. Agency for... Okay, so let's try and unpack this. You might have seen some headlines recently, pretty surprising stuff, actually.
Definitely caught my eye. Big news.
Yeah, about the formal dismantling of the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID. Right, that's how our sources refer to it.
That's right. And
Well,
its functions
let's,
now.
let's
Today
grab
we're
that.
diving into a
State
topic
You might have seen
that,
some,
well,
on top
it
of that,
touches on
this
everything
precision
from
of,
national
what,
security to
$8
right
billion
dollars
in
Big
foreign
news.
assistance
We're
funding?
talking about the
About
increasing militarization of
the
some.
formal
It almost sounds like
dismantling
enforcement
of
agents.
the U.S.
that
Agency
You've
for
brought some
International
really
Development.
insightful
The
material,
USAID,
including
right, that's how our sources refer
it's
to
a
it.
pretty unique
Quite something to see it
perspective
actually
And
happen.
its functions
Something
now.
that should offer
Well,
a
there's a
fascinating
profound
insight.
shift.
No
Definitely, and
question.
on top of that,
Especially when
the
you think about
precision of,
USAID's
what,
history,
sometimes
its
billion
role.
dollars in
Our
foreign
goal
assistance
today
funding.
really is to unpack these sources.
Yeah.
And that's
It
really
almost
what
sounds
we're
like
going to do
that,
today.
What
Take
might
a,
be
you know,
genuinely
deep
necessary
dive
to
into what
woodchipper
this all
comment
means.
and what this material suggests is
Exactly,
maybe
something
more
to
about
see it
just
actually
spectacle,
or something
maybe
like
control,
It's a profound
and what that
shift,
means
no
for you.
question.
Listen,
Especially
we'll
when
look
you
at how
think about
enforcement
USAID's
has changed,
history,
the
its
tactical
role.
gear that masks everyone sees,
And the
and even get into some pretty serious
And that's really
constitutional
what we
questions
want to
around
do.
executive
Take
power.
a
All right,
deep
let's
dive
unpack it then.
into
Let's
what
jump
this
right
all
in.
means.
So,
Through the noise.
our source kicks
Understand
things
what
off
the
with an
implications
historical
not just for U.S.
comparison
foreign
that
policy,
monumental
but
Honestly,
policy
it might
change.
surprise a lot of
We've been looking at a
people.
detailed
It
It
reminds
analysis.
us that President Obama was actually called the
We'll look at the
deporter in
reasons they
chief
gave for
and
the change
deportations
and
under his
compare that to the
administration, which lays out some critical
facts
they
facts
far
and
exceeded
sources.
those under President
So
Trump.
our
Okay,
mission
so
here
where
is
do we
to
start?
cut
The
through the
highlighted
noise,
here is
right?
that those
Understand what
earlier
this really means.
deportations,
Not just for
they
U.S.
were
foreign policy.
apparently
The analysis we
completed
looked at
without
says
undue
Secretary
violence.
Rubio
And for us,
finalized
that's
the
true.
source and immediately draws this really
shredding
look at the
contest.
reasons they
Following
gave
the
for the change.
president's
Claims that
request.
today
Right,
the
that
methods
President
used
Trump's
for
apprehending
apprehending
people for
rescind that
deportation
$8 billion
often
in aid
rely
money
on
Okay,
a
so
show
where
of
do we
overwhelming
start? The
force.
announcement itself.
And Congress,
Yeah,
no.
and it goes even further, suggesting that
Rubio
in the
marketed
analysis
this as a
we
blog
looked at
post.
intimidation,
July
Secretary
1st,
Rubio
he basically
finalized
argued
this
this
legacy.
Okay, but the source isn't saying
shredding
overwhelming
this
force is
U.S.
never
interest.
following the president's
No,
request.
no, not at all. It makes that
President
clear.
Trump's
There are
request
times
rescind
that,
the
like a
$8
police
billion
SWAT
in
team
aid
dealing with a
Congress
really
had already
violent
approved.
criminal,
So it makes you
maybe a
wonder,
barricade
Congress,
situation,
they approved
where
this.
I see
And
my
Rubio marked
actually
this
that
blog
gave
post.
a lot
Yeah,
of
July
taxpayer
1st.
criminals who
He
are
basically
allowed to
argued
say
that
it's
you
Okay, so it
Well,
acknowledges that
failed
it's
to
near
advance U.S.
infinite
interests.
taxpayer
Cases.
budget.
Right, you mentioned
It
it.
deserves
brings
a
up the
closer
big
look.
question.
When you actually see the
Near
numbers, it
infinite.
paints
And the
a
source
quite
does
very
mention
different picture.
incidents of
So
violence
what it
against
makes you
IC
wonder.
officers,
Okay,
too.
so the data shows that in
Calls them.
2024,
Does this
USAID
actually
spent about
say
specifically point to
$21.7
things that happened
billion.
at the Portland
What they
ICE
say it's supposed to
facility.
do.
Well,
And it
that
sounds like a lot of
phrase
text.
does
Near
in
infinite
It says, look,
taxpayer
the
budget.
people involved there
But
should
it
face
deserves
the
a closer
appropriate
look.
That was roughly
When you actually see it acknowledges that side too.
a very
But
different
then
picture.
there's a
How
but.
so?
Isn't
What are
there?
those figures?
There is
Okay,
a very
so the
significant
data shows
but.
that in
The source
2024,
immediately
USAID
pivots and says,
spent
okay,
about
those
21
incidents
comes out
happened at an
to,
IC
what they
detention
call a whopping
facility,
$64
not
a
on our
day.
neighborhood
It does
streets.
in
$64.
isolation. The location
But
matters.
put it in
Huge difference.
So when you put it like that,
that was
to this
roughly
perspective.
The analysis
And then
saying
comes
this
this analogy
does
really
next
next
to
to
nothing
nothing.
to
Most
reduce the
AC
budget
activities
by
are the
0.4%.
equivalent
It
of
makes sense. It's
traffic.
just not a significant
Police
chunk of
officers
the
don't
overall
use
budget.
SWAT
per
teams, but it's not just about the total
It
dollars
comes out
spent.
Okay, that
It's
really
also
frames the
about
argument about
where the U.S. stands globally.
It absolutely does.
That's
And
a
to
really
really
good
get where the
point. How do
author
we
is coming
compare?
from with
Well,
this
when you put it
today.
like that, the
You
U.S.
need
is the
to understand
largest
the
single
analysis
donor
saying
in
This
like
is
does
the green
next
beret
to nothing to reduce
Nobody
that
gives
deficit.
more in total.
It
source
makes
tells
sense.
us
Number
the
one, not
author
a
was a green
significant
beret,
chunk of the overall
but
budget.
spent
But it's not just about
10
the
of my
total
23
dollars.
years
Measure
ago
as a
on
percentage of our
actual
national U.S.
operational special
Ah,
forces
okay.
teams
As a share of
in
really
war
important point.
exactly.
How do we
piece.
compare?
We rank near
Okay,
the
so this
bottom.
isn't someone
Among the big
theorizing. This
donors,
is
largest
someone
single
who
donor, there's this
knows
group,
combat,
OECD,
knows high-risk
development
operations.
assistance. Nobody gives points. Someone who
Okay,
knows
so number
first
one in
hand
total dollars.
what it's
Right, I
like
know
to
the
prep
group.
for
They have a
battle.
target
And they
down.
This is a
describe
big
that
deal.
preparation.
The
as
target
the
measure it
source
as a
officer
percentage
of
of
the
national
ritual
and
of
gross
it.
national and vivid
okay.
development.
As a share
Strapping
of
on the
the
dress and
0.7%.
accoutrements of war.
We rank near the
And
bottom.
That
where
feeling
are
of
we?
when you're
big
Sure.
donor
They're
countries,
ranked,
the
there's
bonding
this
with
group,
the
the
OECD Development Assistance Committee compares 32 major donor countries.
Even Roman
Right, I know the
legions
group.
get
They have a
ready.
target.
It's a serious focus
Wow,
mindset.
so
The
less than a
target is
third of the
0.7,
budget.
less
Then
than a
comes
third.
the
So
critical
largest
income.
total amount
Right,
developed.
but the author
Way
says,
down
look,
low.
Zero
We're
point
making
7%.
forays into war zone D
And
in
that's
Vietnam.
where
not
are we?
Home
That's a
Depot.
stark
We're ranked.
contrast.
It really is.
deliberate.
And what makes
Almost
this
jarring
even more
comparison to,
let's say,
say, highlight the
interesting
context.
Okay,
is
so
Secretary
bringing that
Rubio's
combat
own
experience,
history.
that
Oh.
understanding of
Gross
real
net.
battle
What did he
readiness.
say?
Wow.
Well,
So
our
what
sources
does the
point out
author
that as
view
a
today's
senator, he
ICE
argued
and
for
Border
the
Patrol
largest
officers
total
and
amount. He said it was
Well,
way down
this is
in
where
our
the critique
national
gets
interest.
really sharp.
And he also
The
said it
author
suggests
that's a
their own
stark
a lot harder to
contrast.
get really
That's
someone
what
to
makes
anti-American
this
war
combat
and anti-American
would have
terrorism
failed in
is
comparison
Secretary
to
Rubio's
American
history.
history.
One is
Oh.
even alive today.
What did
Border
he
Patrol
say?
officers
So
are
quite a
to
different
arrest it
tune
as a
back
senator.
then.
He argued
Completely
how
different
strongly
tune.
for
It's a
assistance.
real
He said it was
pivot
Paled
from
in
that
in our
comparison.
national
That's a
Which
strong
really brings us to the
And he
core
also said it
question,
made it
doesn't it?
Yeah.
What is
labels
the
this a lot
actual
harder to
impact
recruit someone to
of
anti-Americanism
up as
anti-American
on people's
terrorism.
lives? Performative
If the
means
United
on
States
the
more
politics,
for
the reason
show
beyond the
one
budget
to
debate,
alive
the
today.
quote is,
What does
Huh.
the evidence
gearing
show?
up like
quite a
Delta
different
Force
And
to
on that,
indiscriminately round
completely
up
different
rounded
tune.
people
It's
is
a real
real
pivot
pivot
from that
necessary
position.
for
Which
protection
really
in the
brings us
land
to
is
the core
performative.
question, doesn't it?
So
Okay,
the
what
argument
is
is
the
display
actual
itself is
impact?
the
It
point,
concluded
not
the
necessarily
US
the operational
humanitarian aid
requirement
on people's
for that
lives.
level.
Like food,
That's
beyond
exactly
the
the
politics,
argument being
beyond the
made.
budget
Say give
debate.
away
What
92
is the
million
evidence?
lives.
Similarly,
92
30 armed
million.
officers
92
supported
million
by
lives.
tactical
Yeah.
vehicles.
2001
The data is pretty striking by a family
That's
study.
peer review
Is not the result of
staggering.
land
It is.
analysis.
The
And
British
the study
study
didn't stop
Okay,
there.
a reputable
It projected
source.
that getting rid of U.S.
Evocative.
It concluded that
Well,
U.S.
it could lead to
humanitarian
over
aid
14
directly
million
challenged
deaths by
food,
2030.
medical
14
health
million more
directly
deaths
saved nearly
just from cutting
92
this
million
And the
lives.
source
92
adds trust of
million.
92 million
It's a
lives.
despite
Between
the math,
2001
it is
and
clear some of
2020.
the
It really
officers
puts
are
the
enjoying
scale
it.
of
That's
this
staggering.
straight
It
into
is.
the issue
And the
of
study
mass,
didn't
because
stop
that's
there.
become such a
It
common
projected
sight.
that getting
The
rid of
source
U.S.
does
initiative for
acknowledge
AIDS
legitimate
could lead to
disaster
over
mass.
14
Our
million
sources
deaths.
estimate
Yes,
that
it
PEPFAR
definitely does.
alone,
It points
14
out,
million more
you know,
deaths
real Delta
just from cutting
Force
this
saved
issue.
around
That's the
25
projection
million
based on
lives.
their faces.
People at
It's
risk
huge
from
potential
potential.
mass
25
human
million.
If they might
It really
operate
puts the
covert
scale
one
of this
later,
into
say,
sharp
incredible.
relief.
Okay,
It is.
think about
Yes,
stakes
President
programs
Trump's
like
rescission
Right.
request
President Bush's
specifically
police
targeted
wear masks
PEPFAR
by
funding.
capturing
Our
cartel
sources
members.
estimate
Right,
that
I remember that.
PEPFAR
There was
alone,
some controversy.
since it started back in
That
2000,
is
the Senate
real
eventually
danger.
voted around
So
25
given those
million
examples
of
of
the
real
administration's
danger,
claim
what
that
justification
justification
does
25
ICE
million
Russia
from
was
just that
false?
one.
Okay, so the money was
source says
restored.
ICE,
It
but he
is,
said
and
there
yet
there
President
damage done
Trump's
anyway?
That's the
rescission
crucial
request,
part.
personal
even though the
Specifically
funding was
targeted
restored, the
PEPFAR
analysis
funding
shows
as a
that
real
the disruption
concern.
Right, I
itself.
remember that. There was some
But how does
controversy.
There
problems
was.
PEPFAR
The
programs
Senate
were
eventually
challenged
voted to
pretty
lives
directly.
were lost.
It
And
turned
lives
out
were
the
already
administration's
lost.
claim
Which really
in
makes you
about
question that claim
humanity.
the administration was
Regular
false.
cops.
Okay, so the
That
money was
life-saving
far
and
more violent and
humanitarian
dangerous.
assistance
Was there
was
damage done anyway?
That's the
Exempt
crucial
from,
point.
Even though
Yet
the
these
funding
lives
was
were
restored,
lost
the
and
analysis
parked
shows
with
that
police
the
cars eventually
disruption
coming back. It
itself
doesn't sound like it was
Basically,
fully protected.
advertising their
all.
presence
Even
and profession
temporary
when
disruptions
lives were
have-
lost.
Well,
That's
and
an
lives
illegal
were already
contrast
lost.
to the
Which really
conclusion.
makes you
So
question
around
that
that point,
claim the
justifications
administration
given
made.
now. Even with all their
That
weaponry,
life-saving
Rubio
and
and posing
humanitarian
here out
assistance
UN
was
ICE officers
supposedly
must be
exempt
very
from all
fragile
this.
indeed.
He cited a
Yeah, if
statistic
lives
that
were lost,
countries in
even
sub-Saharan
documented
Africa
eventually
voted
coming
for
back.
the
It
U.S.
doesn't sound
only
as fully
29%.
protected
Not
as
at
other
all.
unenforced
Even
resolutions.
temporary
So,
disruptions
UN
have
if it's not
resolutions.
primarily
fatal
about
protection
protection,
in
these
yes,
specific
sometimes.
essential
So
So
resolutions,
shifting
what does
back
the
to the
source
justification
suggest
and how do our
is the
sources
real
view that?
purpose of
Secretary
this?
Rubio
They
mentioned
basically
something
call it
about
a
back to the
meaningless
earlier
dispute.
critique.
Yes.
Source states why.
He cited a
the argument is that it
statistic
inflates
in
the
sub-Saharan
importance of
Africa
these
voted
unnamed
with the
and
UN
then very strong
resolutions
judgment
at the
calling the
time.
mass
while
unessential
completely
devaluing
devaluing
the
actual lives
That
saved
was
by
the
the AIDS. It's like
Because of the
comparing
principle
apples
of
and
accountability.
something entirely
And how do our
different.
sources
Okay,
view
source
that?
argues
There's a
no
difference
matter
in
They
how
basically
the
call it
USAID
a
is given
meaningless
in America
dispute.
deserve to know
Meaningless
who's
is
enforcing
why.
the law.
Well, the
According to
argument
the
is that it
identity
inflates
and
the
unlike
importance
countries
of
like
these
Russia or
unnamed
China,
UN
whose
USAID,
Right.
especially
while
humanitarian
completely
aid,
devaluing
primarily
the
given
actual
based
lives
on
And the imagery
it's
used
like
not as a
comparing
bribe for
apples
vote is
and
political
something
favor.
entirely
Exactly.
different.
Parallel,
It's not
okay.
transactional.
And the images
There's a
of
difference.
anonymous
USAID's
mass aid
influence,
given
the
compared to
argument
people
goes,
off the
came
street
from
in
its
unmarked
visible
vehicles
presence
that
commonplace
logo
in
from
the
Russia
American
Unlike
have no
countries
place
like
for a
Russia or
democratic
China,
and open
worldwide.
society that built
USAID,
goodwill,
especially
soft power.
humanitarian
A lot of
aid,
it
is
is
primarily
part
given
reputation,
based on
political
need. And the
context.
concern
Not as a
now
bribe
is that
for vote, but
dismantling
suggests
USAID,
this whole
it's not
approach is to
transactional
perceive
in the same way.
escalation. Who benefits
USAID's
from it creates
influence,
more
the
problems
argument
for those
suggests,
who
came from its
basically
results
argues
that
to
U.S.
a large
logo
extent
in
ICE
American
has
directly
created
to
its own
on
problems.
aid
like Russia,
deliveries
China,
by
worldwide.
treating
there are
as a source of
geopolitical
stakes,
stakes,
not
a
just
large
secondary
segment of it.
population
Hard
as an
and that
inherent
connects
enemy.
directly to national
And the
When you do
concern
that,
now
the
is that
source asserts how this
dismantling
theory
is
may
bound
USAID
to be a
keeping America
essentially
silent
squanders.
that
Well,
results in
think
putting
about
who
global
benefits
health.
from
So the
that.
tactics
Well,
they
the
employ
sources
huge
suggest
world
it
action.
basically
That's the
believes
argument.
that
And
U.S.
even if that
fighting Asian
pushback is
influence
illegal
directly
or
to
unacceptable
competitors like
orders,
Russia
the
and
source
China.
finds it
Exactly.
okay,
We
so
all
there
learned
are
that lesson the hard
geopolitical
way with
stakes,
COVID
not
as
just
well.
humanitarian.
Diseases cross
And
and
how,
connects directly
according
to
to the
national
Global Health
administration
Administration
How
at the
so?
time,
How does
responds
So
to
can you
foreign
give
aid
some
impact
specific
keeping
examples?
America
How did
safe?
USAID's
Well,
work
think about
with
global
help
health.
U.S.
USA
security?
played a
A
huge
larger
role.
show
Our
of force by
sources
deploying
highlight
National
the
Guard and
fighting
Marines
infectious
to provide
diseases,
security for the
responding to
ICE and
outbreaks.
Border
Exactly.
Patrol.
We all
Ebola
learned that
like
lesson the
Ebola,
hard way
yeah.
with
Heavily
COVID. By
armed
getting
as they
involved
are.
early,
Diseases
supporting
supporting
military
military
health
to
systems,
back up
heavily
monitoring
armed
from federal
viruses.
agents.
So
USAID
can you give
helped
some specific
contain
examples
diseases
how
before
did
they
USAID's
spread
work
widely.
help
help
potentially
U.S.
reach
security.
US.
The
Source
source stopping
claims
Our
claims
that
sources
President Trump
highlight
has been
you preventing
itching
them
to
from
invoke
getting
the
established,
insurrection.
responding to the
communicating,
insurrection.
becoming
Like
for listeners
Ebola.
who might
Like
not
Ebola,
already be
yeah.
familiar,
What's the
by
sin?
getting
It's
involved
like a forward
early,
defense.
supporting
It's a big
local
deal.
health
What else?
systems,
Essentially,
second,
gets
monitoring
around
the
that
basic
pesky
treatment of
posse
people with
comitatus.
USAID helps contain these
Posse
things like
comitatus is the law that generally prohibits using the U.S.
How does
military
stopping
for
threats
domestic
at the
law
source?
enforcement
well,
purposes.
treating AIDS
without
infected,
specific approval
established,
from Congress.
mutating,
It's a
becoming
cornerstone
bigger
of
globally.
civil military
Less
relations in the
virus
U.S.
circulating
It's like a
means
forward
less
defense.
chance of
Invoking the
spreading
insurrection
everywhere.
would be a major
Second,
step.
just
Allowing
basic
military
treatment of
to
people
fund
with
war
Okay, so
laws.
reducing the
existing
global
diseases like
pool of
AIDS
the
in
virus. And the source
Africa,
points to a
precisely.
specific moment.
And the worry is,
On the first
if
day
you
of his health
abruptly
term,
cut off, well,
the
treating
president
AIDS
supposedly
effectively
directed the
dramatically
Secretary of
reduces
Defense
the
and
translosis
Secretary
of
of Homeland
virus
Security to
globally.
study
Less
using
virus
the
circulating
insurrection
is not
and
just
the
less
conditions
chance
of
to
the
spread
border.
eventually.
Wow, day
including
one.
potentially
They
recommend
affected
it.
the US.
According to the
okay.
source,
No
reducing the
there.
global
Never
pool
is.
of
The
the
secretaries
virus.
did
did
not
not
precisely.
advocate
And the
using
worry
the
is,
insurrection
if
camp.
you
Okay, so it
abruptly
didn't
cut
happen
off,
via that
smallpox
official
is a classic
recommendation.
example,
AIDS,
but the
USAID
source mentioned
tuberculosis,
a
all
major
workaround.
Yeah, this is interesting.
You're
A
gonna see
workaround
increases
was
not
found
just
by
right
declaring
there,
a
but
long and
eventually
narrow
here.
strip of the border a
Exactly.
military
Same
zone.
idea with polio.
Over there. The
Campaigns
source is
brought it
quite
really
blunt here,
close to
stating there was no
eradication
military
worldwide,
reason
so
for
close
this
that,
action.
but declaring it a military zone
Smallpox
hadn't
is the
the
classic
classic
example.
necessity
It did.
was
It
in the US.
does
Central
empower
to
the
campaign,
military
that's
to
the
arrest
one. We
anyone
erase
entering the
global
zone
smallpox
without
from the planet.
authorization.
Court dries
Wiped
up.
it out.
So
Diseases we
it
thought
achieved
were
a similar
practically
outcome
gone.
military environment
Exactly.
in arrest
Same idea with
without
polio.
formally
Pulling all
all
these
these
Campaigns
threads
brought it
together
really
across
close
the
to
state.
eradication
What's the big
worldwide,
dots?
so close that,
Tactical
routine
gear,
polio
the masks.
vaccination
I think what really
potentially
stands
urgent
out is
Secession Act.
well, just how
What's the big
effective
takeaway
That
for
could
us?
change.
That's the
As a
warning. If
society.
those
And
global efforts
relatively
fall short
cheap,
because the
too, when
support
you
The
dries
source
up,
warns about the
diseases
power
we thought were
concept. Effective in
practically
what way?
gone
It says the
could make a
Insurrection Act
comeback.
would hand the
And
president
saving
a
millions
blank
of
check
lives
and
first
all
and
these threads
foremost.
together.
Helping